Welcome to another episode of Coup Save America. When we talk about gender-based prejudice, most of us think first of misogyny, the hatred or disdain for women. But today, I want to talk and address about its lesser discussed opposite, misandry, the hatred or contempt for men. Misandry is often dismissed or even joked about, but it has real and serious consequences for individuals and for our society. It might seem strange to focus on prejudice against men, given that men are, as a group, have historically held most positions of power in the United States. It's also true that misandry has not shaped our laws or institutions the way misogyny has. There has never been a matriarchal system oppressing men equivalent to the patriarchy that has oppressed women. But prejudice is nonetheless prejudice, and any hatred directed at a group, even a historically powerful one, can be toxic. In some circles today, it's become quite fashionable to speak about men in ways that would never be tolerated if directed at women. Dismissing misandry as harmless humor or punching up overlooks the damage it can do. So let's shine a light on this issue with nuance and candor. To decide what misandry is and isn't, let's start with a clear definition. Misandry literally means hatred of men. The word combines the Greek misos, hatred, with andros, man. It can refer to dislike, contempt, or ingrained prejudice against men or boys as a whole. If misogyny paints all women as inferior or unworthy, misandry does the same in reverse, targeting males as a group. However, it's critical to explain what misandry is not. Criticizing an individual man's behavior is not misandry, nor is calling out systemic sexism or patriarchy a form of anti-male hatred. That is a social critique, not blanket hate. When we talk about misandry, we're not talking about legitimate grievances or calls for equality. We're talking about prejudice that stereotypes or vilifies men as a class. Examples of misandry include sweeping claims like men are trash, assumptions that all men are violent or untrustworthy, or jokes suggesting men are inherently incompetent or buffoonish. We've all seen the phrase men are trash circulate in memes and hashtags in recent years, a phrase born of frustration perhaps, but one that undoubtedly generalizes all men in a derogatory way. Another extreme example, the social media hashtag #KillAllMen, which cropped up as a dark joke in some online circles. Some users claim it is satire or a coping mechanism. But hate speech is hate speech, no matter who it targets. Rhetoric that casually talks about harming men is never acceptable, even when framed as humor or hyperbole. One place misandry is highly visible is on social media. Spend a few minutes on certain TikTok or Twitter feeds, and you might stumble on viral jokes that generalize men as horrible partners or call out specific individuals for their bad behavior. For example, one popular joke making the rounds is dating men in your 20s is that you get to experience motherhood, implying that dating a man is like babysitting an immature child. These internet barbs are clever on the surface, getting laughs from shared frustrations about bad experiences with guys. But taken in volume, day after day, they form a narrative that the majority of men are useless, deceitful, or infantile. Such contempt has even spawned a tongue-in-cheek term, heteropessimism, the notion that straight women are publicly lamenting how awful men are, even as they continue to date them. It might seem like harmless venting, yet consider how normalized it's become to bash men online. On the more subtle side, misandry can manifest as stereotypes. For instance, the trope that men are bumbling fathers or useless in domestic tasks. Think of commercials or sitcoms where dad is portrayed as an incompetent doofus who can't change a diaper or cook a meal. That's played for laughs. But it reinforces the notion of male ineptitude in caregiving. Or consider assumptions that men are emotionally clueless or naturally violent. Or the idea that men can't be trusted around children. These are prejudiced views about men that people sometimes accept uncritically. Labeling men as inherently brutish, stupid, or disposable, those attitudes fall under misandry. We should also touch on how misandry is perceived in contexts like family life and the law. Men's right advocates often claim there's an institutional misandry in areas such as family court, divorce, and education. For instance, it's frequently argued that custody battles are biased against fathers, that courts presume mothers to be better parents and thus routinely favor them. This is a complex issue, but it's true that a stereotype of men aren't natural caregivers exists and can influence expectations. Likewise, some point to how society responds to abuse or violence depending on the victim's gender. When a woman is a victim, we, rightly, have outrage and support. But what about male victims? All too often, their experiences are downplayed or even mocked. A man abused by a female partner might be laughed at or told to man up. That's a form of prejudice as well, rooted in the notion that men should be tough and if they're hurt, they must be weak and deserve ridicule. We see this in the paucity of resources for male domestic violence victims and the stigma men face in reporting such abuse. According to the Centers for Disease Control, about 1 in 3 men in the United States has experienced physical or sexual violence or stalking by an intimate partner in his lifetime, a surprisingly high number. Yet shelters and support for these men are scarce, and society rarely talks about their plight. One could argue that this neglect reflects an undercurrent of misandry, or at least a lack of empathy for male suffering. Misandry and misogyny can feed off each other in a vicious loop. When men feel unfairly maligned or hated, some men respond with anger toward women. Essentially, they become more misogynistic as a counterattack. Meanwhile, women who see hostile reactions from men feel their negative views are confirmed, fueling more misandry. It's a dangerous feedback cycle. When misandry is normalized, men often either shut down and withdraw, or they respond with equal hostility. Both reactions fuel the cycle of separation and erode any chance of mutual understanding. Rather than inviting men into conversations about change, misandry pushes them away, or even radicalizes them. In recent years, we've seen growth in the manosphere, online communities of disaffected men, some of which, like incels or certain men's rights group forum, fester with misogyny. Many young men drawn to these groups cite feeling blamed or hated by society. To be clear, that doesn't justify their toxic worldviews, but it suggests that if we want to address male extremism, we should also watch our rhetoric about men in general. Demonizing men collectively can backfire, entrenching the very attitudes against women that we're trying to eliminate. In short, hate breeds more hate. Gender wars intensify, and everyone loses. Misandry makes it harder for men, women, and people of all genders to trust and cooperate with each other. In a society where one gender views the other with suspicion or contempt, collaboration suffers, whether it be in the workplace, friendships, or romantic relationships. Women who have internalized men are just bad may avoid mentorship from male colleagues, or assume the worst of male partners, which can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or at least prevent healthy connections. Likewise, men who feel women hate us no matter what may withdraw from engaging in equality efforts or even from seeking relationships, leading to loneliness and or resentment. Ultimately, a climate of mutual hostility undermines social cohesion and the possibility of genuine equality. Equality isn't just about laws and paychecks. It's also about seeing each other as partners and fellow human beings. Misandry drives a wedge into that by portraying men as adversaries or irredeemable. It creates an atmosphere where cooperation is replaced by cynicism. Another consequence of misandry is that legitimate issues affecting men can be ignored or belittled. For example, male mental health is a serious concern. Men in the United States die by suicide at over 3.5 times the rate of women, a stark statistic often linked to societal pressures on men to hide pain and avoid seeking help. If society is steeped in the idea that men are fine, they're the privileged sex, they don't need support, we might overlook cries for help. It's not that men have it worse overall, but wherever they do face unique challenges, misandry makes it harder to talk about or tackle those issues earnestly. In essence, while misandry may not keep men from voting or climbing corporate ladders, it does corrode the social fabric and individual lives in subtler ways. It fosters division, amplifies grievances, and leaves everyone walking on eggshells. Importantly, it's not just men who suffer from misandry's fallout. Women and non-binary folks suffer too when it triggers backlash or prevents genuine partnership. A society where the sexes are at each other's throats is a poorer, less healthy society for all. Having identified misandry's presence and why it's harmful, the crucial question is, what do we do about it? How can we prevent this prejudice from spreading? And how can we respond when we encounter it? Here are some strategies and ideas at both individual and collective levels for reducing misandry and its negative effects. The first step is, of course, to speak out against all sexism. Just as we call out derogatory remarks about women, we should call out derogatory remarks about men. This can be, of course, uncomfortable because society might not back you up the same way. You might even get eye rolls or, oh, come on, it's just a joke. But change starts with willingness to say, actually, that comment isn't okay. The key is consistency. If you'd object to a statement about women, be ready to likewise object when it's about men. This models integrity. Remember, big changes begin in small social moments. Next, we should foster inclusive dialogues about gender by encouraging conversations where all genders can share experiences and grievances without judgment. Misandry often festers in echo chambers. For example, a group of women commiserating about bad men until it snowballs into, men in general, or a group of men venting about feeling attacked when they start believing women hate us. Breaking these silos and getting people talking to each other rather than about each other can diffuse extreme attitudes. Community dialogues, mixed gender forums, or simply friend groups that value open discussion can all help. By listening, we learn that painting any group with one brush misses the individual stories and complexities. It's also important that we promote positive male role models and images. We can highlight examples that break negative stereotypes as a preventative approach. Media, education, and parenting can all play a part. Show and celebrate men who are compassionate, nurturing, respectful, and supportive of equality, because they exist everywhere. When society visibly values men for qualities beyond the typical masculine tropes, it undercuts the narrative that men are incapable of X or all men are Y. And we should absolutely support men in healing and positive identity. If misandry partly arises from men's negative behaviors, then helping men heal and improve is a preventative measure. Society should support men in developing healthy masculinity, one that doesn't feel threatened by equality or criticism. By addressing the issues that some men may have in a constructive way, we reduce the ammunition for misandry and such sentiment. In parallel, for those men who feel unfairly attacked or bitter, there should be spaces for them to voice that and get perspective, perhaps through counseling or constructive men's groups that don't veer into misogyny, but rather focus on personal growth and understanding others' views. In other words, invite men to be allies and problem solvers in gender issues, not the enemy. When men are actively engaged in gender equality efforts, it dispels the notion that they're obstacles, and it gives less reason for anyone to resort to misandry out of frustration. Initiatives like male allyship training, mixed gender volunteer projects for women's causes, or campaigns like He for She, which, despite some criticisms, aim to involve men in fighting sexism, are all valuable. They create a narrative that men and women are on the same team, tackling issues side by side. On a big picture societal level, combating misandry and misogyny might mean rethinking some of our cultural values. As a nation, we could move away from glorifying radical self-reliance and instead value interdependence. This speaks to the idea that our culture often pits genders and individuals against each other, celebrating a "I don't need anyone" attitude. But in truth, humans need each other. Men need women. Women need men. And every one of us needs community. If we lean into that, teaching that collaboration and mutual support are virtues, then there's less room for narratives of one gender being the problem. Instead, we see each other as part of the solution. This is somewhat philosophical, but it can manifest in encouraging cooperative projects, co-ed teamwork from early ages, and media that highlights friendship and alliances across gender. When society's message is "we're better together" rather than "battle of the sexes," misandry and misogyny lose cultural oxygen. As in everything, we must encourage critical consumption of media when it comes to ideas of misandry. Each of us should practice and promote media literacy. When you see a trend online that's essentially man-bashing, pause and ask, what's the context? Is it punching up humor that might have a kernel of truth? Or is it sliding into hate? Support media that treats people as individuals and promotes understanding. By being mindful consumers, we won't amplify those voices that spew misandry. And if you run a platform, consider your content. Is it healing or is it dividing? And adjust accordingly. In all these strategies, the common thread is empathy and consistency. We should extend to men the same principle we champion for any group. Judge people as individuals. Don't prejudge by group. It sounds basic, but it does get lost in the heat of social tensions. Fighting prejudice against any gender requires remembering that two wrongs don't make a right. Responding to misogyny with misandry, or vice versa, only perpetuates pain. Instead, as cliché as it sounds, responding with education, empathy, and assertive kindness is more revolutionary. By consciously choosing respect over ridicule, by listening as well as speaking, and by holding ourselves to the same standards we expect of others, we can ensure misandry finds no safe harbor in our communities or our hearts. This doesn't mean ignoring legitimate grievances. It means channeling them towards solutions rather than scapegoats. It means recognizing that men as a group are not the enemy. Ignorance, violence, and injustice are. And men, like women, can be part of defeating those enemies. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and this is, of course, Coup Save America. My guest today is Martin Henson, the executive director of the B Men Foundation. He's here to discuss a specific and destructive form of misandry, anti-black misandry. And we'll be meeting Martin right after the break.
Save America. Coup Save America. Podcast you need every week. What you want to for the latest news to understand economy and politics basis. This is Coup Save America.
My guest, Martin Henson, is a writer, activist, and movement strategist whose work confronts the systemic dehumanization of black people in America and reimagines how we support their healing, agency, and liberation. For over a decade, he has worked at the intersection of abolitionist politics, grassroots organizing, and mental health. He challenges the systems that harm, which includes examining the ways we think about victims that allow harm to happen. As executive director of the B Men Foundation, Martin leads an organization to build affirming, culturally relevant support systems for black men. His work counters emotional well-being, masculinity, inclusivity, and trauma-informed community intervention. Martin's background in mental health adds critical depth to his writing and organizing, equipping him to ask hard questions. What does healing look like for people under siege? What happens when theory forgets the body? His writing explores these themes with clarity and purpose, often engaging the failures of mainstream liberal discourse, the commodification of identity politics, and the ideological rigidity that undermines effective activism. And Martin joins us right now. Hi, Martin. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. That was a good introduction. I almost forgot I wrote it.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I hadn't really given a lot of thought to Misandry before kind of meeting you, and it makes a lot of sense that this is a problem in society. I mean, I think now of sitcoms like what's the show? Home Improvement, for instance, where the male is just kind of this buffoonish character, and you see that kind of as a trend throughout sitcoms even up till today. And when you apply that to black men in particular, I can see that this is a real societal problem. Can you kind of give some insight into, I mean, this has probably always been an issue, especially given our racist country historically. Mm-hmm. But when did this really become kind of a mainstream problem?
Well, for black men, not a mainstream problem. When we're talking about the neighborhood Misandry, it's been, or what's included in it, a lot of this analysis.
You're muted, Mackenzie.
Martin, is echo really bad? Is there something you hear in John's that he fixes sound?
How's this?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you much better now.
Oh, okay. There's no echo. I didn't know if it was just my feedback. I was going to try to power through with the echo, but this is better.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. So the issue of misandry in society, it has a few different theoretical positions and how people feel about it. For me, as it relates to black men, it's just a way to color or phrase the conversation around how do we talk about black men specifically when we are engaging the racist narratives or the racist oppression that we have to deal with in society. So it's not something that I think of that it started here or it started at this point or
right.
Another position, but I can talk about how identity framing within the U.S., coming from a variety of political orientations, begin to become really pointed in ways that I begin to notice.
Okay.
Because I've never not been a black man, and I've always had the experience of the intersection of being both black and male, and misandry wasn't the word that I gave to it. It was just racism. That's just what I called it.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was too until I really thought about this issue, is just identifying it more as racism than misandry. But there is a distinction, and I wonder, how do you define anti-black misandry, and what actually makes it distinct from general anti-black racism or misogyny even?
Okay. I'm gonna explain it in the simplest way possible. Anti-black misandry is racism that is specifically focused on black men, or racism that is particularly misandric in focus. So on the masculine or the male element of blackness. We don't typically disaggregate these two things because racism, as we know, or in many cases have been enough to at least start the conversation. So we're talking about things that happen to black men and black women, the types of discrimination that each are navigating. It wasn't until the conversation around police brutality came alive in the public sphere, mainstream discourse, that I realized, for one, the carceral state is hyper focused on black men,
yes,
and to a large degree men of color. You can see a lot of the outcomes that black men have, the negative outcomes, that come from the prison industrial complex enacted on Native American folks as well. But as it relates to Black men specifically, uh, that's where I saw the need for the conversations when we start talking about police brutality and the way that people were reacting towards the singular victimization of Black men when it was pulled away from the larger Black community. That showed me, oh, this is misandry in the sort of very Black sense. And I was just really incredibly surprised. So that's where it started this journey for me in some senses, to discover and to get better at talking about the dynamics at play.
Right. Yeah, the prison industrial complex has been, I often refer to it as just another form of slavery.
Yeah.
It's almost as if slavery never ended. We just renamed it and put it behind prison walls.
Yeah, it's not even almost as if it just never ended. And we have an incredible system of propaganda
Yeah.
that allows us to believe that people behind the walls are not enslaved. But virtue of the 13th Amendment, then that's the case. That if you have committed a crime, you are put in the status of slavery. But because of, and this kind of pulls into how we think about anti-Black misandry and how we think about the treatment of Black men. I'm trying to use those synonymously because anti-Black misandry is not a phrase people use very often. But when we talk specifically about Black men, that's something people can draw their mind's eye to. But the prison industrial complex exists in the way that it does, with as a system of slavery that just changed form.
Yeah.
Chattel slavery was ended. It gives an example of the types of things that we're able to accept as long as it fits the levels of comfort within either conservative or progressive discourse that we're used to existing under. So we can go and advocate to our congressmen or whoever our elected official is that there should be better, more humane prisons, that people should have opportunities when they come out. The option for rehabilitation and education behind the wall should still occur, and be really absent-minded of the fact that slavery still exists. So if you went to those same politicians and said, I want to end slavery, they'll walk you back out the room the way that you came, because that they'll say, I can't do that. But when we start thinking about what liberalism is and the different positions that we live in, we get so committed to what we see as progressivism, or whether incremental or big, that we forget what is the primary stance that we're thinking about. What's the humanity look like of these people? And so I bring these conversations forward with an interpretive lens across having been an organizer, across having been an executive director, or being an executive director towards an organization that serves Black men, and a variety of other intersections that I have, and say, hey, this is actually worse than what you thought it was. And for me, when I saw the things that were happening due to the Trump administration,
Mhm.
the divestment of resources from communities of color, most which of color, the punitive things that are happening towards people behind the walls, or the carceral framings that are increasing, as well as the persecution of LGBTQ folks. I said, like, oh, this was starting 10 years ago. Or if you want to go back even further, after Obama was elected.
Right.
I find that people are they haven't put that together yet. So that's why I like having these conversations.
Yeah. I had a lot of hope for Barack Obama. And I thought that was going to be a pivotal moment in the history of our nation.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, he disappointed me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like he did enough to kind of restore or bring a measure of racial equality to the forefront. I feel like he kind of almost escaped from that a bit, like it was more of a distraction to him. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, Obama wanted to be everybody's president. And there's a level of racism that he had to navigate in
Right.
the office of the presidency that occurred. I'm not saying it as an excuse for his shortcomings and failings, but we all remember when he wore a brown suit. It was national news because he was breaking some decorum. And meanwhile, the president that we have now just tore down half the White House because he wanted to make a ballroom.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen the sort of uproar that we saw from Obama making it wearing a brown suit. Like it's a very different sort of experience, just in how people are receiving the identity of the person in office. At the same time, America exists as a foremost world superpower that is fully entrenched in imperialist
Yeah.
campaigns around the world, and Obama was a part of that.
Yeah.
Now, for many people that came before me, Obama represented the acceptance of Black people in a way that they had never seen prior. You know, a Black president being able to stand and command a country was something that folks did not believe could exist. Looking at it now, and I campaigned for Obama when I was younger. I was in the mix doing the things, but there's just a lot of contradictions there, and it's a hard feeling as a Black man to understand the value of someone seeing a powerful person who's been marginalized represent a country that has told him that you know better than a slave, and then to look at what he didn't do as it relates to police brutality,
Right.
how he continued the National Defense Authorization Act and the ability for the government to expand its overreach and move further and further into our personal freedoms and security. That's a tough contradiction, but I have a different lens now, but also acknowledge what it meant at the time for the people who were witnessing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about what myths exist about Black men that you consider kind of foundational
Mhm.
to the U.S. political culture, and why have they endured?
Well, first of all, when you look at racism as a system, it's largely misandry, meaning that it is focused on the men, primarily because men represent, from a colonial position, a fighting force or for concerns of a potential uprising. So they're worried about men in that way, and they're worried about men's ability to reproduce, many times with white women. So there's a sexual fear of Black men that has come with since the transatlantic slave trade. And so this sense that Black men need to be controlled, they must be managed, has endured since post-slavery. And so foundational to the myths around Black men is the one that we're dangerous and we're violent. The other one is that we're hypersexualized. There's a bit of like projection and a sense of when white culture imagines Black men, it induces some sort of inferiority complex within white maleness that is very much a product of racism, a product of slavery. Because to many degrees, white culture and white people define themselves as define Black men as a negation of humanity and whiteness as the primary archetype. So there's this sort of comparative look, this idea of Black men as the negative excess of human male identity. So those two things are going to be big all the time. There were criminals; those they just continue to reproduce themselves. So for me, when I saw them start to show up in progressive spaces, so given a little bit of my background, there was a time when I was an organizer for the Black Lives Matter movement, or during the Black Lives Matter movement, in one of the Black Lives Matter chapters, and being in spaces where these ideas of Black men being hypersexual, hyperviolent, inherently patriarchal or hegemonic as it relates to masculinity discourse. And just to define that really quickly, hegemonic masculinity is the idea that masculinity exists and functions to dominate and suppress other identities to preserve itself. So it's a particular lens of masculinity that has come through feminist discourse. And feminist positionality has given us great things. and ideas around the nature and the support of women. Uh, Unfortunately, at times when it's imposed upon men of color, you'll get a reinterpretation of these same racial myths and stereotypes that have fought of black men again since the transatlantic slave trade. I know I get said a lot, but those are the myths that come to mind for me.
Where do you see the line between, because I'm sure this is going to be a question that our viewers are going to ask. Where do you see the line between legitimate critique of the patriarchy and narratives that specifically dehumanize black men?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a conversation we should always be having. And in this world of hyperpolarization,
Yeah.
it's so easy to not have a conversation and then prescribe the person who may have a critique as an antagonist, as someone who is against you, but they may have a lens that we miss. But that's a great question. So thinking about the critique of patriarchy, which always leads me to the next question, is like, when people say patriarchy, what do they mean? One lens is that patriarchy is the idea that cultures and governments and civilizations exist under male power and authorship to the detriment of other people and identities. So there's this sort of leadership or this structure exists from us, for us, and everyone else is in a subservient position. And if there's another way I'm looking at it, the idea of just male leadership, just in general, just as a descriptive category, it could mean that as well. So for me, I tend to have more questions. I love these conversations. I tend to have more questions. Well, what do you mean when you say patriarchy? To what degree? Because sometimes there are people who believe that any male leadership is suspicious, and it's you'll run into that in certain spaces. Not all of them, but some. And I'm curious about that. Want to investigate that. Want to know what experiences or positions lead them to believe it. But I still, even in my critique, think that that's a valid conversation to have around what's the difference between patriarchy as a system and then legitimate critique when we prescribe these ideas of a problematic masculinity or inherently patriarchal identities onto black men and men of color to continue to subjugate them in this system.
Yeah, I want to ask too about divestment from black men as a strategy. Would you define it as a strategy, an ideology, or is it just like market logic? And who is the beneficiaries of that?
Well, it's divestment. If I'm just going with the basic definition of it, it's just to extract resources from something as opposed to resourcing it. So a sort of more common idea of divestment is boycotts. You if a store is not doing what you want it to do, if they're not meeting your the values that you have, you say, hey, we're going to divest our resources from that store. There's been a variety of them that have had some different campaigns ran against them recently. That's something that people will do. Boycott is really an organized form of that. But as policy, divesting away from black communities in America this is the thing that we're always battling, trying to get the adequate resources that we need because the government decides through politics how to distribute those. So we're fighting the divestment that tends to be happening all the time and the extraction that occurs. So if I'm going specifically and talking about how this happens with black men, you can talk about it from a variety of ways. Incarceration is always the first thing that comes to mind, and how when black men are being hypercriminalized and pulled off the streets, the variety of different laws that are unfairly imposed on us, that's taking people out of their community, that's taking another source of income from a family. And there's whole blocks and neighborhoods that see that extraction in very real ways that play out in people's ability to maintain their houses, to have the sort of education that they want, all of this. So trying to get what we deserve is already hard. So if I'm going a step further, deeper into my position, how I think about it, when the Black Lives Matter movement came in response. But just to remind folks who don't remember, I always count the time period as 2014 through 2021. It's relatively short, but did a lot in that time. Black Lives Matter movement was concerned with police brutality, the high-profile deaths of Trayvon Martin, which happened a little bit before my timeline, and then Mike Brown, and then Eric Gardner within that period, and then finally kind of culminating with George Floyd.
Yeah.
Brought a wealth of resources that were poured into different organizations, different initiatives that were here to offset the harm that we were seeing coming from the state, killing unarmed Black men. So when I mentioned divestment, one of the progressive responses during that time was to say that there's an interest in focusing on the most marginalized, and which was interesting to me because the number of Black men that have been killed by the state, unarmed Black men that have been killed by the state, has largely stayed the same throughout the course of that time and even now. It's likely going to increase. I don't want to be pessimistic, but just due to the types of trends that we're seeing, it's probably going to go up. But during that time, one of the progressive responses during the Black Lives Matter movement was to say, let's focus on the most marginalized, which in essence, I'm saying something that's tough. I think people haven't quite looked at it this way, is a sort of position of divestment towards Black male victims. This the idea that Black men are getting too much attention and that there are bigger victims elsewhere, which was framed in this position of centering the most marginalized, which resulted in, for all of those victims and for those communities, Ferguson community being one of them, they had a significant amount of resources extracted from them following these high-profile deaths of majority Black men. They brought all this foundation money and racial equity and racial justice interests, billions of dollars that ultimately never went into the types of initiatives and programs and organizations that would prevent Black men from being killed by the state or offer resources to victims and families or legal support. Like it wasn't going there, it was going elsewhere. And to categories of things that were framed as serving people who were more marginalized. So this was happening, and I just want to give you more context for why this tweet piqued my interest. In addition to being in those spaces, which I found that they were just very hostile to Black men, which didn't make a lot of sense. But we'll talk about it more. On the other side, as I mentioned, the rise of the conservative far right post Obama, that was almost like what we see now with this sort of Trump presidency and the MAGA, that you can say that began in 2008, because then we started to see the underground moving of white American white cultures that begin to see themselves as under threat and their identity being under attack. And I don't know if you're familiar with the 14 words for those who are listening, there are 14 words that define many people in the alt-right or the far-right's position towards preserving white communities. And it goes something like, we have to preserve this future of white children. That's just shorthand.
Yeah.
But this idea, in addition to the number and the projection that we had, I want to say that America would no longer be predominantly white by like 2050. I believe that was the date. So do you start to see those resentments and concerns and fears and anxieties start to push forward a really conservative white cultural base that started to show its face in the All Lives Matter in the beginning, which we initially, or at least I initially saw as just a pushback towards responding to Black folks. But it turned into Blue Lives Matter, and then you start to see these alt-right groups which was an intentional sort of rebranding of white supremacist stances that became more and more mainstream. And now we're looking at the things that we're looking at now because of these positions that were happening. So I saw, and within that, antagonism towards black men. So I saw all of that happening in that moment. Cast forward to now, and I said, okay, I saw this coming because of how they were treating us, and I don't have any satisfaction in it, but I love talking about it because it's just a conversation I don't hear happen.
Yeah, absolutely. How does anti-black misandry intersect with the class, especially in talking about like the working class and poor black men?
Oh man, it's so hard. So I'm gonna go back to police brutality and just the way people were conceptualizing activism and community organizing that still maintain an anti-black misandric view. The first part is that the idea of black men as the primary victim of police brutality was immediately contested by everyone. The more of the mainstream cultural base, which was largely white, said that officers were just doing their job. We need to protect. It became a protect police officers sort of thing. They're under threat and duress, and then you start to see all lives matter. Within the more progressive social spaces, the left spaces that I'm in and I'm on, I'm definitely on the left. Let me be clear. I'm offering critique, but that's the lens I'm coming from. But within those spaces, there's also contention toward the truth of whether or not black men were really the victims of this violence, with having some levels of false equivalence being made where other more marginalized groups were dying at the same rate, and oftentimes this meant framings of black women dying at the same rate, and that it was due to patriarchy, that we don't know how many people actually, that we don't know about women dying. Like this sort of misandric view or disdain towards black men that I was witnessing in the spaces that were supposed to be working to resolve police violence and address it. And I was often met with people who believed that, like I said before, that black men were not deserving of the positions of victimization that they came into. Now, the intersection, it's just really, I love this conversation that first of all, thank you for allowing me to have it.
My pleasure, believe me.
The idea of intersectionality, which was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, talks about the lack of data that analyze how being both black and woman was accounted for and how we were analyzing different situations. The legal context was one of the first ones that was in that sort of curiosity, which is valid. And that became a marker for progressive understandings of how to create fuller, more thoughtful and inclusive movements. So we're moving forward with this idea of thinking of intersection. What I was finding in those spaces is that when it was time to think about these intersections of people who were victims to this level of violence that comes from the state, being both people being both black and male, there was a resistance. It's almost as if the idea of being intersectional was framed in a way meant to move people away from black men as victims. But as you bring up, the idea of class, black men who are people who are both black, male, and poor, make up a significant amount of the people who are in our carceral systems now. Those men who oftentimes don't quite have the opportunity to advocate for themselves. And if to another degree, we can talk about people navigating different levels of mental illness, with our prisons being one of the largest psychiatric care providers that we have in the U.S., I found the ability to think intersectionally by virtue of that particular framework about black male victims to be lacking, to be not only lacking, just people were incredibly hostile toward it. So in my mind, I was starting to make the realization that the advocacy I was doing for young men and people who are like Trayvon Martin, people who are like Mike Brown, is that the spaces was in, these men would never have been allowed to be in it. They were black, they were male, they were poor. They likely didn't have the language of advocacy or
Yeah.
social justice that was present at the time. And that was alarming isn't the word, concerning isn't the word. It took me a while to believe how these things were converging and how they were accepted.
In terms of movements that you've personally experienced, what are some of the telltale linguistic cues that sort of signal misandrous framing, even when the intentions are progressive?
It's a lot of them. I have to say before I get into it, I think people's intentions are to have, like I said, have more expansive spaces, to have more egalitarian approaches, think about justice in the ways that resolve the pains that they've had in their life and the marginalizations that they've felt. So I think the intention is always to create a good space. And sometimes there's the fallacy to mistake comfort for success. So your personal comfort in a space doesn't mean that you're doing something well. I would honestly argue that most of the time when you organize, it's just uncomfortable. It's not a safe space. But you do it to pass the things forward and give opportunities to folks. But the things that cue me up to let me know that there's a struggle to accept and understand men is most times if they don't mention men. If they don't mention, this is what I do. If they don't mention men, I'll look for the website and I'll see, are there any men in these pictures? Because as you know, promotional framing is very intentional.
Right.
And thinking about who are they looking to invite in this room. So when I don't see reference to men when we're talking about the types of issues where that violence occur, not only that violence occurs, but men are the primary victims of that type of violence, I tend to be very wary. I'll ask more questions. I'll look things up more. If I know one of the people, I have a conversation with them because I feel like good organizing is about invitation. Who feels invited to your space? And I'm looking for the presence of men to feel invited. I also feel like if I come into an organizing space that says that it's focusing on centering the most marginalized, then I just read that as they prefer women in the space. That's just what I read that as. Because there's been many occasions I've gone into spaces and it is an informal way of saying that they're oriented towards a particular lens, which is fine. But I know that I might not have an experience that feels conducive with the types of ways I want to be treated there.
Yeah. You know, you kind of mentioned this earlier a little bit, and I'm wondering, how do experiences of queer and trans Black men, excuse me, complicate or kind of clarify the framework that you're proposing?
Yeah, it doesn't change anything about it for me. Is when I think about anti-Black misandry, it still includes queer and trans men, men coming from all different walks of life and types of understandings of self and identity. Men who are a variety of different faiths or nationalities, partly because, or largely because, the nature of the discrimination that happens toward Black men, that happens because you're Black and you're male, is going to pave across all those communities,
right,
in many of the similar ways. I think from what I know from the different points of data that I look at, that's the starting point. To think about who's going to give me the widest swath of Black men. So whether or not men exist in whether they're formerly incarcerated or have a different level of ability that they're navigating, or part of the LGBTQ community, they're still going to have these outcomes as it relates to health, as it relates to incarceration, uh, as it relates to education. Like that's still going to be present. So it doesn't change anything for me. I think sometimes the presumption is that when men are talking about advocacy for men, that it is exclusionary. Uh, and I think that there's some validity to that, because there are certain types of advocacy. Because I think you mentioned uh, men's rights earlier, and it's tricky because I don't want to throw it all into the right wing boat, but there's an overlap that can happen with men navigating grievance in ways that they haven't been allowed to in other spaces, that they can find a place that they feel is acceptable for them on the far right. And my goal in the work that I do, that's not just towards Black men, but towards men in general, is to be able to talk about that with men, hardship or struggles, and be affirming in ways that don't lend themselves toward hegemonic dispositions or the idea of domination as success, but really get more into vulnerability where we can talk about difference
Yeah.
and how it impacts us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I can imagine some listeners out there might be thinking, this sounds like special pleading for men. How would you reframe the stakes?
Yeah, well, we want men to be human. There's all things I hear often is that we want men to be vulnerable. We want men to treat other folks with dignity. And when I start to begin conversations with people about the things that men endure and navigate, there's a couple things I say. One of them is that biggest victims of violence are men from other men, and it's not close. Uh, and so when men have lived their life with these expectations of being male and being leaders, which oftentimes means that you have to hold it in, you have to keep it to yourself, to achieve and persevere and take care of everyone else. When men have to hold in all these harms and these hurts, that's because masculinity there are responsibilities with masculinity that we didn't take on ourselves. The people around us also need us to be certain things in certain ways. And some of those ways are affirming, and some of them, portion of them are hard, really hard, and really difficult. So men need a space to be able to talk about that reality, so they can be better to themselves, first of all, and then better to the world around them. So the idea of special pleading for men is something. Men asking for dignity is, you would much rather that than them trying to take it. And that's the types of space I'm trying to build, or the types of spaces I'm trying to build.
What's the difference between centering Black men and centering Black male pain? And why does that difference matter?
Yeah, I think even the framing of centering is tough now because it's kind of taken on a political meaning.
Yeah.
And for me, I think of it as, when we're talking about Black men, I'm centering Black men's perspective and centering Black men's knowledge base when we're discussing solutions for what those Black men are going through. That's something that feels very normative to how we talk about any particular population's needs. So when we talk about Black people, oftentimes, unfortunately, when it's time to talk about vulnerability, we think gender. We think about Black women. And then when we talk about masculinity or excess or violence, we think about men. And unfortunately, what that means is that women become the curators for Black male narrative of hardship. And we kind of burden them in this way and say, hey, speak for them, because we're not actually asking Black men, we're not actually giving them opportunity. We're not reading the things that Black men say about themselves, because that would disrupt many of our systems that are very criminal oriented, many of our political systems that occur. I'll give you an example of what happens every year. I just recently had a conversation about this. Every political season, we talk about what's going on with Black men's voting. Every political season, doesn't matter how we vote. It doesn't matter who the candidate is. It's a talking head point, and you're gonna hear it for at least a month, if not more. And I always know when the season is beginning because I'll start to hear that talking point. And part of how it works is that if there's a progressive or Democratic candidate who's on the bubble, concerned about winning, there becomes a targeted focus on how Black men are going to vote. With the idea that Black men are going to suddenly swing conservative. Now, this has never happened. Black men have never en masse voted for a conservative candidate. In fact, Black men are the most progressive male voting bloc that we have in the United States. Now, the fact that this particular concern exists when contrasted against how Black men actually vote can only be explained by racism. And when it's time to talk about that as it relates to Black pain and the Black male experience, it's important that we talk through Black men around how they're situated politically. And I think the reason why we don't is because that takes away from the legitimacy of other voices that seek to use our body, our position, our narrative as a carrot to hold over people who they want to go out and vote. So that's just one way that it comes up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because you're right. That conversation about, you know, the Black voter, how they're going to vote, does seem persistent. And it's a bit disturbing, actually, to consider that as something that is just another form of racism in this country. Speaking of kind of politics, I want to go back to the Obama era for a moment.
Yeah.
What narratives about Black men were kind of amplified during the Obama years, and why did they kind of harden into the BLM era?
Well, in the Obama years, we were navigating. For me, what I was remembering was the sort of respectability discourse. There's a lot of pull your pants up. Sure you look presentable. As folks were trying to get into the job market, Obama represented the height of success that the Black man could achieve. So there's a well-polished, well-spoken, articulate, quote unquote, Black man was now the archetype. And we're dealing with how to navigate that. We're dealing with whether or not we should be saying the N-word. Like all of these different cultural markers of acceptance and assimilation to really were the things that I was hearing about Black men at the time. What that started to become moving forward into the once the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement began to start, was still the same focus on respectability, but it shifted like profoundly in a more progressive way, which to be respectable was to embody ideas and values that were very much aligned with the radical feminists or fourth wave feminists, to be more clear, ideas that were coming through. Really good ideas around thinking about, we saw Me Too, we saw pronouns being integrated, we saw a conversation around heteronormativity and patriarchy, and respectability started to be centered around, for one, how much you were coded or understood as being in alignment with these positions, and how well you could regurgitate these to some degree virtue signaling. I hate to take terms from the conservative alt-right, but they call it virtue signaling. But that's one thing that does make sense. Like, people were aligning with the way that you talk, and because of the age of social media, how slogans and hashtags and these kind of soundbite positions and phrasing became really popular. And so respectability moved from this idea of being prepared for business, and more so as moving in alignment with what became sort of this universal positioning, or what was touted as something that if everyone did this, we will all be okay. But this respectability, it also it created uh, it created the idea that if you just did these things, or if you were safe, or you never caused harm, you never said the wrong thing, then you were good enough. So for Black men at that time, I don't know how familiar you are with Twitter, but the Twitter was wild at one period of time. And so any part of your digital history from the time that you were present until current that might have seemed suspicious was a marker for exclusion. So
Yeah.
now you have even more narrow pathways to joining, organizing community collectives, and there's more focus on accountability. There's more of a focus on identity, uh, and you would think they would have expanded the way that people's access points, but it actually made it harder to exist in certain spaces because you have to be perfect. You had to be perfect in every way. And if you were not, then you were called, quote unquote, called into accountability, or there might have been some, you start to see the rise of this, I can only call it people being not just called out, but vigilante activism is if people getting recorded saying something racist at the corner shop and they're going to put it online, you lose your job. You start to see that happen. And that was happening toward everyone. It wasn't just towards the conservative racist people. We were seeing a shift in how people thought about punishment.
Yeah.
And for me, I was seeing it happen towards Black men at a time where it felt like it didn't make sense for that to be happening towards Black men.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cancel culture has really been pervasive. To the point that it's been absolutely destructive to everything that it's supposedly trying to accommodate.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't give people room because, like, as you said, I mean, anything that you posted prior, the context didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
They pulled an old tweet and that now defined you, who you are. No room for growth, no room for, the contextual space around what was said. And that kind of goes into the Black Lives Matter movement a little bit too, because people were like with George Floyd. Are you familiar with Candace Owens?
Yes.
To this day, she perpetuates this idea that George Floyd's death was caused by a drug overdose,
Mm-hmm.
and that the police were just doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you buy into that narrative, what happened to George Floyd was a travesty. It was a form of systemic racism. It was a form of it was just absolutely grotesque and disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
But yet you have this Black woman talking about this issue,
Mm-hmm.
covering for the police,
Mm-hmm.
and presenting this as a cancel culture issue. Police are being canceled because they're being called racism, but that's not really racism.
Mm-hmm.
How did you kind of interpret all of that from your perspective?
Oh man, yeah, that woman is terrible. Let me just start off by saying that. Terrible. I think so. If I can pull it back, what we were starting to see at that time, there's a focus on identity.
Yes.
My position is that the baseline culture as a whole is moving further to the right, outside of what we consider progressive or conservative. We're all moving toward the right, and how it started to progress on the left was that positive framings or progressive framings were seen as internal dispositions that you either were born with biologically or sociologically embedded with. So the idea of universal healthcare, let's say that's something you believe, people believe either you believe it or you don't. And if you don't believe it, you've never believed it and never can. So you're out of here. So this sort of limitation of people's potential and polarizing them into an enemy if they do not immediately acquiesce or align with our particular stance. That was one thing that was happening. And you saw people like that be gravitating toward these pseudo intellectuals that exist on the far right, like Candace Owens and other folks. The other thing that began to happen is you started to see with either an identity and multiculturalism and this idea of thinking about people being diverse, that wasn't just originating on the left and progressive sense. We were seeing that happen on the right too. You're starting to see leaders come out of far right positions that look as dark as me, look like me. What if I don't sound like me? But they work because they're working to assimilate, uh, and they're breaking this idea that we had that only certain folks who were blonde hair and blue eyed or a Caucasian by ethnicity would be attracted to it. You know, because white supremacy is white supremacy, no matter who's doing it. And we start to see more people like that. So Candace Owens was one of them that was particularly able to do well because she represented a black talking head on the white spaces that can say the things they couldn't say.
Yeah.
And this was a part of uh, Richard Spencer's very clear declaration and intent to make the alt-right more palatable to the average everyday person. That was why the name the alt-right came up, is where they were trying to rebrand to be more accessible, and they succeeded. Uh, so you started to see more things like that. You sort of see people like Candace Owens come up. I've seen her documentary. I went and watched it. And I'm like, what is this woman talking about? Uh, and it's all the things that, because she made it, just to be clear for folks who might be listening, she made a documentary making claims around Black Lives Matter movement. Like you said, that George Floyd had really OD'd. It's a terrible racist lie that I'm sure she made a lot of money from. But you start to see more people like that. You start to see the integration of these racist groups, like multicultural positions and perspectives. So as we're on the left thinking about what does diversity look like, they're doing it on the right, and in some cases, I would say they're doing a better job.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
they're like pulling people in. They're um, I want to say you have Moms for Liberty. They're showing up at different school functions. They're really doing a good job of making their position accessible. And where I live as an activist is that I I don't deny people humanity. I don't believe in doing that. So I have to always feel like there's an opportunity for these folks to be able to shift and join our side. So my job as an organizer is to create the narrative or create the pathway that they can come on over. Now, or I think that that pathway should exist. I might not be the one to do it because every conversation ain't for me to have. But I think that that should always be the orientation. And unfortunately, the far right has been they've been better at that than we have.
Oh, no, there's no question about that. They have out-strategized us. They have out-messaged us.
Mhm.
Um, it's quite frightening, actually, and it almost makes you think that the left is kind of incompetent.
Yeah, I think that I've been studying a good bit around genocide. I actually started studying it maybe 10 years ago when the Black Lives Matter movement began, because I was wondering, how do societies and cultures get to the position where they're able to justify the extermination of their own members? Because we're seeing that with Black people.
Oh,
The,
yeah.
the things, yes, the things they do with this incarceration and the healthcare situations that we're navigating. But I was once trying to understand, and what I started to see is that the types of progressive ideas that will happen during those regimes or during those moments of far right or genocide are often inept. Like they're not actually meeting the needs, and I struggle with the left right now because it's unable to provide an alternative. to the alt-right invitations and language. I think that the left is oftentimes looking for universal ideas, something that works for everybody at all the time, and they're
Yeah.
looking for people to come into their groups and orientations value aligned to a degree that doesn't particularly matter for the goal that you're trying to get to. So there's because when you're organizing, you have something that you're moving toward, and you create agreements and create values and create coalitions relative to that goal. Uh, so the left now it feels like is always trying to make sure people are aligned with everything, and that just feels like a mistake to me.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And the left is notorious for its cancel culture phenomenon as well, which I think is very discouraging and very counterproductive in many respects to achieving, again, the goals that progressives claim that they want to achieve.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So I want to ask you too, can you trace a genealogy from the post-civil rights law and order kind of politics
hmm
to today's reactionary resurgence through the figure of the black male?
Post civil rights, so it means from the '60s.
Yeah, the whole law and order kind of mentality,
hmm
which we're seeing kind of a resurgence of now with conservatives. Um,
Yeah, yeah. There was a time where, in response to the Black Power movement, we saw intense amounts of police repression and arrest and murder of
oh, murder, yeah.
Black organizers, not just Black organizers, but a variety of different organizers that were coming up in that space in that time. Because many of the organizers who were coming, uh, many of the organizers were veterans. And that idea of coming back from war was allowing people to think with a more militant lens than we have now. But not militant in the sense as seeking to fight with the state, like militant in the sense of very organized and very disciplined towards providing resources and care for the communities that they were inside of, and seeking to maintain the safety of. So you start to see like a really intense repression that began to happen at that time. So thinking about what happened to Black men, uh, I feel like there's a, a generation of us that was just locked up because once by the time you get into the '80s and '90s, you have the war on drugs,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
where you have these incredibly draconian laws on drug possession that causes Black men to be gone and put behind bars for 10, 20 years at a time, basically a whole generation that they're gone.
And that was the intent of the war on drug, by the way. It was a racially motivated intent to do exactly that.
hmm Yeah, yeah, I agree. Uh, and just I feel like every 20 years, in my theory, every 20 years or so, the time for which somebody is born and becomes an adult, there's a new wave, there's a resurgence of energy towards any given cause. And so by the time we start to move into the 2000s, we have the anti-war movements that are happening after the Iraq War and after 9/11. People are starting to investigate and think around the nature of imperialism and what that means. And then by that time, you start to get to the uh, uh, Occupy. You get to Occupy, and folks are doing that. So to me, if I'm really tracing, this includes the general American society as a whole. So I think that these sentiments really bled through everywhere. Occupy feels like the beginning of this particular wave of thinking about what organizing and what movement can look like. Now, Black people have always been organizing toward particular causes in their community, but these moments of these highlight moments that are happening in general culture give people an opportunity to develop step in as a younger person and move forward. So by the time you hit Occupy, you have this focus on decentralized movements, Black leadership models. People are kind of starting to create and invest. You have digital networks that are expanding, and we don't quite know what to do with them yet because the technology has advanced beyond our degree to be able to comprehend it, and even more so now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you get to this sort of hashtag activism that is captivated by high mobilization but low organizational retainment.
Yeah.
So that's something that was happening for most people that Black men were finding their way in and out of. In addition to the different voter fights that were happening, in addition to things around incarceration that were happening, that's kind of this landscape that we walked up and down to this moment.
I want to ask you too, how did the nonprofit sector or even philanthropy
Mm-hmm.
kind of channel movement energy in ways that really sidelined Black men?
Mm-hmm. That's a big question. Um, it's a big. I'm wondering now what's making me pause, because I've thought about this a million times. It's hard. I think the part about it, before I get into it, that makes this stand out to me is that you go into these spaces, nonprofits, efforts for social good, thinking that they're going to help and
Yeah.
they're going to save you, and to find out that they operate as a sort of cooling apparatus for American social tensions that move anxieties and organizing into more controllable avenues, most of the time steering you back into the electoral justice system.
Yes.
So what I saw was a lot of we're supporting leadership in the most marginalized. So again, you start to see efforts and support being divested away from Black men and into the most marginalized groups, which in essence means everyone else. So it's I say most marginalized because that's the language people know, but the way I think of it, they're just saying everybody but Black men, basically, because that was framed as the most progressive way to think about organizing against police repression at the time, which doesn't make sense when you think about advocacy, because every advocacy movement that we've ever had has been centered in its victims, and advancing the needs and the responses toward the folks who have been hurt by those causes. But you saw that, and that was kind of shifted away from Black men. What that looked like for me is that you would go and fill out application forms to get funding or to be involved, and they would say very explicitly, we're centering women, indigenous, queer, trans, formerly incarcerated. They're centering everybody but you. And even then, they're not even talking about people who have negative experiences with the police or formerly incarcerated. It's so interesting to watch it happen. But that was how I was seeing it occur in that moment. Now, the nonprofit industrial complex it has its good parts, but when you were thinking about, let's say, police violence, they're not going to fund something that is in direct critique with the state that they have to continue to be in relationship to.
Right.
It's not gonna, white supremacy is not gonna gonna fund its demise. It doesn't quite work like that. And you're finding out because you're seeing the types of programs and projects that they're willing to lend money toward. And even when I think about my nonprofit, the Men Foundation, when I'm looking for support for the types of things that Black men navigate, the money is for corrective avenues and responses. So if I frame the work I do with Black men or men in general, if I want to expand it out and say I'm trying to help men not engage in sexual assault, we want to teach men to be anti-patriarchal. If I use that lens, now I'm already doing that, but if I use that lens, then that would bring me this sort of deficit-based framing and understanding of Black men, then people have a lot more energy for that. So either you go that route with the deficit-based framing for support, or you go the route of just not being seen as a category of victimization that needs further support. So when people come now with the work that I do with men or with Black men, and they say, we need to do something about these men going to the alt-right, and I say, well, where are the opportunities to do that? You know, there's more opportunities to talk about it than it is to actually intervene in it. Because if I'm rewinding all the way back to your initial framing of what misandry, what does it cost us, basically, to change our framing? These men, these disaffected men, are going someplace where they feel valued and validated, and I have to be able to create alternatives in a left space to do that. But if we only fund critiques, what can I do?
Yeah. What are some of the biggest obstacles that you find in doing your work, in terms of kind of shifting the narrative, pushing for real restorative justice and change?
I think it's just how people feel and think about Black men. What was very clear to me is the cultural impact of the everyday ideas that folks have about what they think Black men do and feel. So, give you an example. This happened maybe 6 months ago. I can't remember. It was sometime this year where there was a conversation about Black men enrolling in college. And it was like, why aren't Black men enrolling in college? And in the conversation, instead of talking about the racial disparities and the barriers that we have to navigate that prevent us from moving up, there's a conversation that begins around Black men just don't want to. It becomes a moral, motivational discourse around they just don't want it. They're not trying, which leads us back to the racial myths and prevailing stereotypes about Black men that is so hard to get past. Because when people believe that Black men aren't trying, and they're not able to understand that these positions that folks have toward Black men are happening when they're Black boys. They're happening in the schools. They're happening with the teachers. They're happening with the discipline rates and the expulsion rates, where they're disproportionate. And for the same offenses, we're seeing that white kids or kids with other races are not having the same sort of responses. So we can't really start there at the root causes. Then folks are missing the conversation. So the cultural understandings and perspectives and assumptions about what they think Black men navigate, that's hard. Because people aren't reading, they're not reading. Let me rewind. People don't see Black men as legitimate authors of their own experience. So they're more likely to see truth as valid from someone talking about a negative experience with Black men than they are Black men talking about the experiences that put them in that position. So we can talk about Black men all day as being hyper-violent and culturally backward or whatever. But if I tell someone that they should read The Man Not by Dr. Tommy Curry, which is one of the foremost authors in Black male studies, they won't read it. Now, for me, to even begin the conversation about Black men's victimization, I have to know about victimology. I have to read feminist discourse. I need to know psychology. I need to know sociology. I need to quote names. I need to be articulate. I need to be charismatic. I need to be all the things I'm doing here. None of this happens by accident. This is the vehicle that it has to be taken seriously to start the conversation about culture and how that occurs. Now, I give an example of why culture matters. And of course, there's other intervention strategies that I think about. But when the South lost the war for the Union and Black people were free, one of the things that they were, the people, the Confederates were really, really invested in was the cultural symbolism and what was being taught to the children and erecting these statues and creating society. They were ensuring and embedding the cultural norm of superiority in these ways that probably wouldn't have been seen as that big at the time. But now, when I think about my history books, when I went to school 20 years or so ago, and knowing that Africa didn't have a lot in this section, or we're still navigating some books or educational books talking about Black people being indentured servants, or reframing slavery as something that's as an inconvenience.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing that I think about. So the cultural move for people to invest energy and thought into shifting their perspectives on how they think about men, because the problem isn't just a Black man. I realize if I talk about Black men eat this, Black men eat that, people don't care. Like they just don't care. I have to, and I'm gonna keep trying. I have to talk about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be progressive, what it means to be conservative, what it means to be abolitionist, what it means to be restorative. I have to break things down in so many small bites to get people to the point where they're willing to reconsider their relationships to all the identities that need Black men to be a boogeyman for them to feel okay. And that's why I live and invest in sort of these cultural conversations and narratives.
Yeah. What are the biggest challenges that Black boys have in America that we need to address, and how can we address those problems?
Well, one of the things I'm really adamant about is Black boys being criminalized in school.
Yeah.
Restorative justice is a field that I work in. And restorative justice is the simplest way I can describe it is creating alternatives to punishment systems, opportunities for people to be restored back into the environment as opposed to being excluded by way of disciplinary processes. So what can happen in schools, in some zero tolerance schools, which are schools that respond to negative behavior by exclusionary and sometimes police intervention, what we can do to respond too often. And it's likely, again, we're going to have a fight ahead of us for the shifting conservative social tide that we're in. I heard a guy say the other day, an elder, he said, I never thought I would have to be in the 60s twice. And it's just like, I don't know if I'm gonna forget that, but I can at least do my part. But anyway, being in schools and changing and shifting the policies to give opportunities for students involved in some level of disciplinary measure to be invited back in the community. And even before, as a preventative measure or as a baseline way of being in the community, having constructs that allow folks to feel present, to feel invited, to feel like there's room for their distinction and vulnerability, allows Black boys to have a more full experience. Because what also happens with that is that they're perceived as adults far earlier than other kids. And that I think part of me has a reaction when I see a boy who's young and he is, and people, I think if I see people like are treating him like his age, or maybe even treating him a little bit younger, I'm fearful. I feel that in me because I feel like he's not going to be prepared. And I know that's not a correct way to look at it, but I get to some degree how my elders and the people who came before me were hard on us in the way that they were, because they thought that getting us ready for the pain was what it meant to be there and to be helpful. And so that's what I think of. I think there's a lot of opportunities to make sure that our schools are safe, and they're places that allow people to develop and develop as students and develop their voice and to feel seen as fully human.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really the key that I've never really understood is the dehumanization of people.
Hmm.
Um, racism never made sense to me. I just I can't fathom how a person's skin color or gender, for that matter, or sexual identity or sexual orientation rather, makes a difference. It's just we seem to have this culture of dehumanization at every single turn.
Hmm.
And talking about the school system, schools are as desegregated now or segregated as they've ever been.
Hmm.
And part of that comes from the way schools are funded. Um, and I see this dehumanization play out in so many different aspects of our society. And it's kind of, you can't help but be pessimistic because it seems like an insurmountable problem to overcome. And as you say, we keep shifting more and more to the right. Why do you think that is, by the way? Why do you think that we keep shifting culturally to the right when, especially in an era where you have this progressive force that people seem to be aligned with, but yet culturally we keep shifting to the right?
I think we've always been on the right. And Trump, people used to say this, and there's some level of truth. They say Trump shows America what we really are.
Yeah, I agree with that statement, actually.
Yeah. Uh, and I, when I was an organizer, I had no patience for that statement. But now, it's like, because you get questions like these, and I know that you through the work that you do, like the truth of it as well. That this is the norm that we've existed under for so long. Uh, and I've only ever known America to be a place that is defined by these characteristics. I've only ever known that. I've been
Yeah.
a black man all my life. I've never had a day off, and will never. I love being black. Let me be clear. But that's what it is. Is you wake up every day and you go to places. I'm just a little bit about my life. If I'm driving and I'm driving to a place I'm unfamiliar with, long flatlands roads. Let's say you get to a town or an intersection where it's just a gas station and like a Hugo's, uh, maybe a McDonald's or something, and you go in there and you use the bathroom. I'm looking for flags on the back of people's cars. I'm looking when I walk into a place the how homogenous the identity of everyone is in there. If I walk in a spot and everyone in there is there from 40 to 60, there's a lot of camouflage. Uh, and I don't see nobody that look like me. I'm gonna be out of there because I have to think about that now.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm not now. I mean, always. I've always had to think about that. And these areas that are, and let me paint a picture for folks who might be listening. When Trump won, Trump courted a lot of these rural areas that felt forgotten. Because the strategy has been to focus on the mainstream, the bigger cities, and they have their tour stops. But Trump was really touching this idea of people who feel alienated and forgotten by the political system. I think if there's a different democratic strategy, we might be looking at a different scenario now. Uh, all that to say, these areas that I'm mentioning that I'm fearful of driving through and being around, they still represent the types of positions and politics that were dangerous to my grandparents. Uh, I still feel like those people are fully human and deserve to exist in the way that all people should. But without the sort of shared space and intervention and curated opportunities to be in connection with each other, that polarization gets dangerous.
Yeah.
So this is the world that this is the only world that I've known. But I hope that for my daughter, she has a different world that she will grow up and become accustomed to.
Yeah, I certainly hope that that's true as well. Although it just doesn't feel like we're going in that direction at all.
Yeah, we have a hard. I've been telling you, we had a hard 20 years ahead of us because of the Supreme Court,
Yep.
because of this move to the right. Like you were saying, America has again, America has always been on the right. One thing I think that we presumed is that our embracing of more progressive stances was indicative of people's thoughts, uh, people's long-term commitments to those causes. I personally didn't believe that people were as progressive on LGBTQ stances as they profess to be. Uh, and I thought they should be, of course. But the only reason Trump lost the last election is because he said people should drink what do you say, Drano or
Bleach. Yeah.
bleach. If he didn't say that, we might be looking at term 3. That's the only reason, because he just fumbled towards the finish line a bit. And from the conversations I've had with folks and the canvassing that I've had, we haven't done as much of a job presenting class-based incentives on the left.
Absolutely.
And because we substituted that for the more social things, which are great, when people showed up at the polls, the things that they were saying publicly were not the way that they voted. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we also have this problem of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democratic establishment is just absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
You know, they don't seem to stand for anything but corporatism. They love to talk about cultural issues, but they don't do anything when they're in power to uplift communities. They don't. I mean, it was Joe Biden who passed the crime bill that was as racist as you could possibly be.
Right.
It was the Clintons who called black kids, in particular, what was it? Predators. Super predators. I mean, these are not people that are going to shift the conversation, let alone the political dynamics of this country. And yet they remain in the forefront of our political system. I mean, Joe Biden was elected president. I would argue that that even his presidential campaign had hints of racism. I mean, when he talked about corn pop, I mean, I was just absolutely shocked that that's where we were, that was a choice that we were given. And so the Democratic establishment to me is just a losing proposition. And until they don't seem to be learning their lesson either.
No, we don't have, and I don't think that they've been able to produce the sort of messaging or policy that will make people turn more towards them.
No, absolutely not. No.
And with Trump, is pretty much invincible at this point politically. You would have to have something really powerful to get him out of there. So hopefully we won't see him for a third term, but we might. So it'll be all of the conversations that we're having around political decorum and opportunity will change and shift drastically, and what it means to be an organizer, which some days, depending on what, some days I feel like I'm organizer, some days I feel like I'm not, it's gonna mean something radically different.
Yeah.
And so I really advocate for the interventions and solutions that I have towards these sort of problems, is that we build in relationship to each other, because we have substituted digital engagement as earned trust. It's not the same. You have to know the people. People say that you got to know the people who live next to you. You have to know the people who are in your community. We're going to be dealing with food stamps being cut within not too long, a couple of days, less than a week.
Yep.
And within 2 weeks, we'll know what that looks like. That's going to be, I feel, catastrophic for many communities. So the basics of being in relationship to people, relational organizing, of having the sort of one-to-one meetings and bringing people over for potlucks or having group events. These are the things that the far right has been doing forever. I tell people all the time, the best organizers are the church. And the church isn't necessarily, sometimes it can be politicized, sometimes not, but they're constantly doing things to pull people in. And if the left wants to be able to offer any alternative for any of the problems that I'm bringing up, you have to create invitations for folks to feel like this is better over here than it is over there.
Yeah. And we can't continue with this culture war nonsense or this cancel culture that has become so popular, especially on the left, which seems kind of hypocritical
Mm-hmm.
when you consider the values the left professes to have,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there's very little room for inclusion in these groups, it seems.
You're right. And the left, and one of the ways the left has adopted the positions of the right is in punishment. And so what I tell people is the moment you disagree, then you're one of those. And the sort of humanistic, welcoming, we're all in this together, organizing around shared concerns has been replaced with more strict and more limiting positions where you have to align with this set of ideals, or you're canceled, or you can't sit with us.
Yeah. You know, my philosophy has always been I'll work with whoever I need to work with that's toward a goal, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's where you have to be. I mean, I don't have to agree with somebody on every single issue to work with them. If we agree on one thing and we're going to work toward that one thing together, then fine. And then we'll deal with the other stuff later. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but you have to be able to work with people across different ideological perspectives, or you're not going to get anything done. And that's where I see on the left is that is not where the left is at. The left is very, no, you have to agree with this, and this, and this. And if you don't, you're out. And I don't know how to change that. Have you had any luck in changing that kind of that framing?
I think people are becoming more exhausted with it, but we're now dealing with the internet. We didn't have social media before, so getting people offline is part of the issue. And then when we're thinking about the solutions, they already exist. You know, we have so many movements that did great things before. Even if I mention like the ACT UP movement, ACT UP being people organizing for AIDS care. Folks were dying as they were organizing. That's a lot of where the die-in that we saw that was so popular from the Black Lives Matter movement, where you simulate dying in a space that came from ACT UP. So the lessons are in these older movements that have already existed, how to organize and how to think. I think people have to study together. They have to, like you said, move toward a common goal and build relationship along the way, knowing what the values are, coming up with group agreements that align with one goal. You can't change the world with all of those. You pick one and you move toward that. And then when you complete that, you think about other campaigns. Because you do have this sense of like this universalism that I feel like is a tendency now, where one approach can work for everything, and that's just not the case. You need coalitions. You need somebody doing something over here, something over there, and you need to be able to work with them.
And the other thing that I see as being a problem too is everyone is looking for the hero politician that's going to save us, right? There's not going to be a hero politician. In fact, I would argue that we're not going to be saved by any politician,
right?
No matter who they are. We're going to have to save ourselves, and we're going to have to do that by kind of organizing outside of the.
Correct. Yeah, and that's what organizing should be. It should be an extension of community connections and relationships. as it is. I would say it already happens in many senses already, but people just don't probably think of it that way.
Yeah.
But if you need different resources, let's say you're a farmer and you know somebody down the road, it'd be nothing for you to go and have some sort of barter system, or if
Yep.
you're in a um, in a cul-de-sac and coming together and having a neighborhood um, association. Like those things matter. Those things are part of it. We need real points of contact with other people who feel differently from us.
Yeah.
And that's the intervention. And I think I don't want people to have to do it before they start doing it. But we might get to the point where people have to.
Yeah. Well, mutual aid is something that we ought to be doing a lot more of. I mean, you mentioned the problem with the food stamps running out. The funding for that's coming right up. And in fact, it might even be this week where that happens. I can't remember. I remember reading a headline about that. With the government shutdown, SNAP benefits are not going to be funded, which is a choice. We need things like mutual aid networks. We need these things to be kind of the grassroots to be built up. We need an infrastructure that doesn't exist right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very hard thing to do. And social media has made that almost impossible.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people have quite realized yet that we don't own social media.
Yeah.
And whatever you put across social media still has to follow the parameters of, and if you're on Twitter, then of a white supremacist owner, which he's about several white supremacist takes. That's why I position him in that way.
Oh no, there's no question about Elon Musk at all.
Yeah, but the nature of these digital networks is that we don't own them, so then people are curating to what's accessible.
Yeah.
On those platforms, rather than either building their own digital spaces or speaking to other folks who are off of them. And the only way we can know what people are doing is if we get offline and actually talk to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Martin, this has been a fascinating conversation. Before we go, I want to just talk about your nonprofit a little bit and where people can get more information about it. So can you kind of speak to your nonprofit?
Yeah. So I'm the executive director of B-Men Foundation. We exist to provide support spaces for Black men and advocacy for issues that are specific to Black men. You can find us on bmenfoundation.org and at bmen on all of the socials. Feel free to check us out. You can offer a donation, or you can reach out to me at martin@bmenfoundation.org if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. Hopefully our listeners have learned a great deal from this conversation as well. I know that, and I knew going into this that it was going to be a difficult conversation just in terms of people focus so much on misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
That they're because again, I can already hear some of the listeners saying, wait a minute, this sounds like the alt-right men's movement, men's rights movement, where you're complaining again. And it's a real issue that we need to address, and it feeds into misogyny. And conversations like this are absolutely essential. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing with your foundation. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. This has been Coup Save America. We will see you next week.